that, I would like to turn the floor over to our program director, Lori Lacefield. Lori.
Thank you, Margaret.
Yes.
Tonight we have Sergeant Amy Wheeler. Amy is a 20-year veteran of law enforcement with extensive training in communications, crime scene investigation, crisis negotiations, internal affairs, and leadership. Tonight, she's going to take us through an officer-involved shooting reconstruction, where specific questions were answered with forensic examinations. She'll also present information on how the study of human beings aids in investigations on critical incidents. This research-based information provides context to media narratives seen after these incidents occur. So a very timely subject, and with that, welcome Sergeant Wheeler.
Well, hello, everybody. I had hoped to have a little bit of a PowerPoint done with some photographs from the case study that I'm referring to. Unfortunately, I believe that there is a legal hurdle to that. Some of the information has been told that I cannot show it to an audience, which is another consideration to think about whenever you start talking about these types of cases, or whenever you have ideas for talking about officer-involved shootings, talking about those types of events in your writing, is that the legal aspect of it that occurs well after the fact. This particular shooting case took place in 2011. So that tells you how long ago it was, but yet now I'm being told that some of the stuff that I'm sharing, I have to basically put it by a lawyer first. So, and I have not had a chance to do that because this shooting occurred in Georgia, and that's where the estate of the deceased is at. So with that, what I can do is I can take you through what happened. And from that, one of the biggest things that most people hear with the media narratives is there were shots in someone's back. How can you shoot someone in the back if they're a threat to you? And that comes into play in this particular case. And so I'm going to be kind of doing some handwritten drawings with you as we go along, so that if you have questions as we go, raise hands, feel free to interrupt me just to kind of keep this going with this, because this is going to be basically kind of taking you through what happened and then how my investigation after it happened was able to prove this is what happened, which is kind of an interesting situation. So the first thing that I'm going to point out to you is we had a city street in a neighborhood. So you have the basics of just a regular street. There was not the standard marks down the middle, but I'm going to go ahead and put those there just so that you can kind of see what we're talking about. So it's just a normal street. I am not an artist by any means. So we have our suspect car is a Toyota Camry. And that vehicle is on the wrong side of the road. So when the officers make a stop, he pulls to the wrong side of the road and he's up against the curb line on the left side of the road. So directly behind him is a marked police car. In this marked police car, the lights are illuminated, and this particular area, all we had were blue lights. We didn't have blue and red. So at nighttime, they definitely blinded you. So all of that light is going towards this vehicle. Now, this is a normal traffic stop. So you have an offender vehicle and you have an officer vehicle. On this particular night, they were running some drug interdiction in this particular neighborhood. So we had an unmarked car that was going around watching to see if they could find hand-to-hand drug transactions, just rolling through, pretending that, that they were just driving through the neighborhood. So with that, they were able to kind of look and see what was going on. Well, this particular car, it was nothing special. As a matter of fact, they had decided that they were done for the night and they were going to make one last traffic stop. So they see this car make a traffic infraction. I believe he ran a stop sign. And so that's when the officer decided to pull behind him and make that traffic stop. Now, what the offender did not know, and this was the Crown Vic police car. What the offender did not know was that there was another vehicle that had come up on the other side of the car. Now, it's important to note that this headlight on the vehicle was out. So there was only a little bit of light coming from here. And if you remember, I said there's a lot of blue light being shown at that suspect's car. So we have 3 plainclothes officers in this vehicle and 1 officer in a full police uniform in this car. So when you have this setup, the 2 officers that were driving, or the one officer driving and the one in the passenger seat, and then there was another officer in this one. This was a white Tahoe. This officer gets out and she is going to come behind and help out the officer that's going to make the traffic stop. So this officer is here. They're going to walk up. These 2 officers are going to approach the car from the opposite side. So that is a normal technique that we will do, especially if you have that many officers. That particular approach style is one of those that is utilized, especially low light situations. You're seeing that a lot on the interstates. I'm pretty sure you've seen it with state troopers. A lot of times, if you're driving down the interstate, you'll see a state trooper. They'll go to the passenger side of the car. We call that a passenger side approach. That's becoming a more popular thing to do in traffic stops, especially in high crime areas or other dangerous areas where there's a lot of traffic. So they kind of utilized a split approach with this because of the number of officers that they've had. But there have been several officer involved shootings that have occurred because an officer approached from the passenger side. And naturally, if you have a suspect that's wanting to do something bad to an officer, they're going to be looking over their left shoulder. They're expecting that officer to be coming up on that driver's side. So they're looking to the left. Where's the officer? Where's the officer coming? So when you approach on the right side, you're able to look inside of the car and who knows what you can see. There have been occasions where people have seen offenders producing handguns and kind of waiting to see when that officer is going to come around to the left, and the officer never comes around to the left. And so the officer will draw their weapon and start ordering them to drop the gun. That's kind of what happened in this situation. So now we're going to do a little bit tighter view on the suspect's car. So the suspect is in the driver's seat of the vehicle. And now you have the officer. So this is the uniformed officer. He is going to come up to the very back. Got the female officer behind him, and then you have plainclothes 1 and plainclothes 2. So they're approaching from this side. Well, these officers look inside of the car and they can see through the back window. What they see is they see in the suspect's hand a handgun. And the suspect is looking in the rear view or in the side view mirror, and he's waiting. The officers on this side yell gun. When they yell gun, the suspect opens the car door and starts to come out. So he's actually coming out of his seat and turning his body towards this officer, who we're pretty sure he thinks is the only officer on the scene. So he goes to identify this officer. This officer in the uniform, he slips and falls because as he hears his partners yell gun and he sees the guy coming towards him, he's trying to back up. He doesn't want to be in this situation because his gun's in his holster. He's in a bad position. So he is unable to really do much. He does what most people would do in that situation. He kind of panicked, and because he's a human being. Yes, he's a cop. He's been through a lot of this stuff, but his immediate reaction was get the heck out of there. So as he's trying to back up, he trips and he falls. Well, when he falls, the female officer behind him kind of catches him, grabs him, and pulls him behind the car. So we get him out of the line of fire. So that kind of happens right in here. Well, as that's happening, he has come out of the car. These two officers here, the first one, he's going to come up and he's going to get a good line of sight into the passenger door. He shoots 4 shots. This officer is at the back bumper. He shoots 2 shots. The first shot goes through the back windshield, goes through the headrest, and as the guy was coming up and turning, it actually went into the back of his head. The second shot came over the guy's shoulder and actually left a mark on his clothing where the bullet traveled. So that's where we start talking about physical evidence and how that works. The first shot, the 2 shots were done in really quick succession. And as soon as those 2 shots were fired, it's a tempered glass. So of course it does what tempered glass does. It doesn't break out, but it shatters to the point where you can't see in there anymore. So at that point, the officer at the very back of the vehicle cannot see inside anymore. The other officer that had come around to the side shoots his 4 shots into that side door. So he's shooting into the passenger door. Well, I've mentioned before, the suspect had come out of his chair and was turning his body. So all of those shots that actually hit him in the back and came down. But was he a threat to that other officer? And what we're able to find out is absolutely. From a crime scene perspective, one of the major questions when you go through and you start accounting for all of the cartridge cases, which are the expended shells, most people call them shell casings, you want to account for all of those as well as all of the projectiles. In this particular situation, there were 6 shots. I found all 6 cartridge cases, but I only was able to account for 5 bullets. I had the one that hit the guy in the back of the head. He had 2 shots that hit him in the back. One hit him in the lower back and then actually traveled down his leg and came out near his ankle. It's kind of amazing what bullets do once they get inside of a body. They don't always just travel straight in and straight out. So that part is important when you start looking at, what happens to a bullet inside of a body and how does that occur. So that particular one, I believe it hit his hip bone, and that's what caused it to change direction. Then we had another one that went in closer to the spine. And then there were 2 shots. One was embedded in the door, and the other one hit the center console of the vehicle and then dropped down inside. So I had those 4 shots from that officer. But the shots from the back, we had the one shot that hit the gentleman in the back of the head. I got called by the medical examiner in this case. One of her questions was there an obstruction prior to that shot hitting him in the head? What I was able to determine is that is the one that hit the headrest. So yes, it encountered something before it actually hit his head. So what the medical examiner is looking at is a bullet should look a certain way when it makes an impact. This one had hit something prior to the impact with the head, which caused the bullet to slightly deform. That creates a deformed entrance wound for that shot on the back of the head. The interesting part that I started coming up with, or that I was telling you about, as far as the questions that came up when we start doing, shooting reconstructions, when we start doing questioning, was this a legally justifiable police involved shooting? And we had the officer's word that the suspect had opened up the car door. That's what we had. We had their word. But what could I do from my perspective that was going to do a little bit better and show this is that this is what happened? Well, I go back to all of my photos. I go back to everything that I've had. We check on the clothing. So that's when I do lay out all of his clothing. And he had on almost like a Letterman style jacket, but the collar kind of folded down. So it wasn't one that just went up with the stripes on it, but it was that same type of material. And it folded down. So almost like a bomber jacket. And the path that I was telling you about that I could actually see the bullet travel went over the shoulder, but under that flap. So there was a perfect length, which is why I really wanted to have this photograph to show you, was you could actually see where that bullet traveled. And it just lightly tore the fabric along the way. Well, I know that one went here and skimmed. So that bullet did not hit that gentleman. It hit his clothing. So where did that bullet go? If his door was shut and the window was rolled up, that bullet would have been somewhere inside of that car. It would have either hit the windshield on the way out. It would have hit the door pillar. It would have hit the driver's side window. It would have hit the driver's side door. It would have hit somewhere in that area, and I would have been able to find it. Or maybe the window was rolled up or rolled down. So if the window was rolled down, it could have just gone out the window. But what I was able to show was that the window was rolled up. So if the window is rolled up and the car door is shut, that bullet would be inside of that car, or evidence of that bullet leaving that car would be present. That was not there in this case. So as I'm looking at the photographs, as I'm reconstructing it, I'm able to show that the door had to have been open in order for that bullet to travel that direction from the back of the vehicle towards the front, across his shoulder, and then exit the vehicle without leaving any other trace. So that's kind of how it's like the anatomy of a shooting. You try to look at what you have, and then you say, how did this physically occur? Because the next part of what I'm going to talk to you about is going to be human performance and the limitations. There is a lot of talk in the world and in Critics to Police Officers about memory. You know, officers are trained to a higher level. Officers should be able to be trained to overcome limitations. But there's certain limitations that exist in the human brain. If you think about how you remember things, there have been studies after studies, and these are peer-reviewed scientific studies that talk about what happens inside of the brain when you create a memory. There are 3 steps, basics. You have to encode the memory, you have to retain the memory, and then you have to retrieve the memory. So, have you ever been driving down a street and you don't remember how you got there? You're on that automatic pilot, and you're like, I've been doing this so many times that I don't remember stopping at that stop sign, but I know I did, but I don't remember actually doing it. And it doesn't matter how much you think, if you didn't encode that particular moment, it's not going to be there. You're not going to be able to remember it. And what happens during high stress? Officer-involved shootings are the most stressful thing that an officer can encounter. And this is why they talk about mental health of police officers being so important, is there's a lot of attention being given to what they call high intensity, low frequency events. It's starting to come up a lot with, you know, the world in general, you know, the pandemic, people going through the pandemic, people going through hurricanes, people going through tornadoes, people going through natural disasters. You know, they're low frequency events, but they're high intensity. You're not going to have the mental capacity to be able to remember everything, because in any given second, you are bombarded with 14,000 pieces of information. Your brain can't process that much. Right now, you have a computer in front of you. You're listening to me talk. Some of you are taking notes. Some of you are just listening to the story. Some of you are trying to, you know, figure out where this conversation's going, what's my end game. Some people have been thinking about, you know, me in general, where did I come from? What, you know, different things are going on in your mind, and these thoughts are behind this. Every single thought that you have is slightly interfering in your ability to remember exactly everything. And so that's why your brain starts taking what they call shortcuts. So if I walk into a room, I'm expecting to see things in a room on the floor. I'm not expecting to see a chair hanging from the ceiling. So if I see that, that's going to draw my attention, and I'm going to see a chair hanging from the ceiling. But now, does that mean everything that's on the floor doesn't exist? No. But if I look at that chair that's on the ceiling, and you only give me about 10 seconds to look inside of that room, heck, maybe even 5 seconds, and then call me out of that room and then tell me to describe the floor, I'm probably not going to, I'm going to remember there's a floor because I was in a room. And when I walk into a room, there should be a floor. Now, could that happen where maybe there was a hole somewhere, but that chair took all of my attention, so therefore I don't notice anything on the floor. I don't notice that there's a gun sitting in a chair. I don't notice that there was a person sitting on the other side of the room. I don't notice, or I don't remember that that person had a bright red shirt on. I might be able to remember parts of it, but my brain is going to try to fill in what it can't remember. When you start trying to say, okay, what did you remember? Well, I remember there was a shape that was in a chair. Well, a shape that was in a chair is most likely going to be a body. So I could almost convince myself, yeah, there was probably somebody in that room. But does that mean I'm remembering it? Or does it mean that I'm looking at it and trying to put that room back together in my brain? And it's a really complicated process when you start talking about how those memories are formed and how our brains really work. And most people wouldn't think that that would be a component of law enforcement or something that law enforcement needs to think about. So that's why we have researchers that do this part of the thinking for us, because we don't know why. And when you hear these questions come out and they say, well, the first story that they get, which is normally while everybody's still processing everything, we had the shooting in Boulder at the supermarket. When you start hearing that story coming out, the first stories weren't exactly what got figured out as more information started coming in. And when that happens and it's involving a police officer, because of the amount of distrust that we're starting to see, the thought is the police officer is lying. And it might not be that the officer is lying. It might be the officer just can't remember. And if they can't remember, that's creating an additional stressor on them. These are some of the things that we think about, because sometimes they may never recover those memories. And so what has been told as far as the standard way of doing these interviews, and there's a lot of pushback on it that you hear from the media. They say, 48 to 72 hours after that shooting event should be when you interview the officer. Now, there is some pushback to that when they say, well, we don't do that for the general public. And it says, we do that for the general public a lot of times if it's not an immediate need to get that information. Like if we don't have a suspect that we're looking for. The thing is that when a police officer is involved in an officer involved shooting, they almost go through the same thing that the victim in a situation would go through, as opposed to the suspect in a situation. If the officer walks into a situation, they're not walking in going, I'm going to go shoot someone. So that happens as a result of a situation. Whereas if I'm going to go rob a store, I have to kind of say, I'm going to go rob a store. And if I shoot someone during that, I knew that I was going in there to rob a store. So if I'm going to interview that person about what they did, I want to interview that person as soon as possible, because there was an intentional act at the very beginning of it. From the police officer's standpoint, how intentional are their acts? And this is where you start to draw those distinctions between the situation that occurred in Minneapolis with Derek Chauvin and George Floyd, because there was a lot of time. There was a lot of time for a lot of decisions to be made. Most shootings are over within 2 to 3 seconds. And in those 2 to 3 seconds, you might have 30 shots being fired, because that's how fast people move. And that's how fast people work. But our brains don't process it that fast. So this is where we're going to start getting into the situation of how long does it take a person to point a firearm at someone, fire off a shot, and then turn around and run the other way. That takes about a quarter of a second. The fastest police officers that can pull their gun from their holster, present their gun, push it out on target, and pull the trigger is about 0.31 seconds. So they are reacting to the fact that somebody just pointed a gun at them and shot at them. But by the time their brain processes it And by the time their body can do the reaction and fire that first shot, that person has already turned. So this is a situation when you look at the Adam Toledo case in Chicago, where they're saying when you break down that video frame by frame, you can see the gun in the kid's hand, but then he drops it and they say you can see that his hands are up when the officer fires. But you have to look at that frame by frame. Most frame rates, when you look at a video, you're talking maybe 10 to 15 frames per second. So if we're saying frame by frame by frame, we're talking microseconds. It's over. It's done within that 1 to 2 seconds. So in those microseconds, how long does it take your brain to process something, initiate action, and then here's the biggest thing, to stop performing that action? So, well, you might have had one shot that hits him here, but then he's turning. So now you've got a couple of more shots that enter into the back. Well, they've done studies that say, how long does it take for someone to recognize a stimulus to start shooting? And then how long does it take that person to recognize that it's time to stop shooting and for the body to stop shooting? It actually takes twice as long. And this has been scientifically studied. And you can think about this when driving a car. When the light turns green to go, you're able to go if you're anticipating it, this types of things. But how many people, when that light turns yellow, there's that hesitation? That's why we have that yellow light, and it doesn't go straight from green to red, is because people need to recognize that they have to come off the gas and start applying the brake. And that actually takes twice as long to do that stopping and change of action than it does to initiate an action based on a stimulus. Does that make sense to everybody? So I'm going to just break that down really, really specifically. So if I'm doing something based on a stimulus, then that's going to take me a certain amount of time. So I'm doing that action, but now I'm going to tell myself to stop doing that action. It takes me twice as long to tell myself to stop doing it than it did to tell me to start doing it when I see something. So those are things that it's part of the reason why they talk about prosecuting officers is really, really hard. And that it is true, because we're going to take a jury and we're going to put that jury in the situation and we're going to break it down. We're going to show them microseconds. We're going to show them those little bitty carved out milliseconds. And we're going to say, this is how much time it took. Can you do that? Could you respond that fast and stop shooting? But that's not what gets the settlements. That's not what gets the papers. And I am in no way excusing every police shooting, but it's part of the reason why there is that disconnect between people like, well, I saw it, clear as day. I saw, that this officer did this and did this, and this is what happened. But that's how it's told to people in the news media. We saw them, they gunned this gentleman down, or they did this or this. One of the biggest ones that we're seeing right now is I believe it's the Dante Wright with the taser confusion. How in the world can you mistake a taser for a gun? Well, some of that is training. Some of that is basic human error. These types of errors occur everywhere. These errors occur in the medical field more often than they do in any other field. But they understand that in the medical field, they say, well, those errors, yeah, they happen, but that person's trying to help that person. So there's a little bit more of a difference with the thought process behind it. And with the medical profession, they're able to take that down and say, oh, well, they were trying to help. They didn't mean to administer, 20 milligrams as opposed to 2 milligrams because they got the decimal place wrong. Well, when we're talking about these fractions of a second, trying to show that that officer intended to do something, that's when you start needing to break down what happened beforehand. And that's where I agree with a lot of the reform efforts as far as changing those things that go up to, and really taking a hard look at, well, what are we thinking and what are we priming ourselves to do when we pull over this car? What are we thinking? Are we thinking it's just somebody that we want to write a ticket to? Or do we think that this person has drugs? And if we think this person has drugs, well, maybe why don't we slow down and try a different tactic? So I do see where the reform ideas come from. But what I wanted to share with you guys tonight was a basic overview of how that process goes. And then I just saw in the chat questions as far as the internal investigations. The first thing that you have happen is one of the things that you're hearing right now when they're criticizing officers, again, the one with the taser confusion, is, I believe, that wasn't her. This was one of the ones from the Louisville shooting with one of the higher ups, is that at a officer involved shooting, and it did happen with the Kim Potter one as well, they're criticizing her in the media because as the supervisor on scene, there were 2 officers that were involved in an officer involved shooting. And she told those officers to go sit in their cars and turn off their body worn cameras. You're hearing that all over the news. She told those officers to turn off their body cameras and go sit. Absolutely. Because if they turn off those body cameras, that means they can't access them through a remote cell phone, so that they can't watch them. They can't watch the videos that they just recorded. So that's going to taint their memory if they watch the video before they start giving you them back. Sorry about that. My dog's going a little nuts right now. I hope that's not too distracting. So the next part of that is not to talk to anybody, because we don't want those officers talking to each other. We don't, hey, did you see the gun, or did you see this, or what did you see when you did? We're going to do what we call separating the witnesses. Well, we're going to separate them, and we're going to turn off their body cameras, and we're going to tell them not to talk to anybody until they start talking to the investigators, their attorneys, and psychological help. So when I hear those types of things being put into the media, where they're almost making it seem like it's a bad thing, I look at it and say, that's the first step. Because as the first supervisor on scene, I want to find out. I ask what they call a public safety statement. What I am looking for in a public safety statement is I am looking for how many shots they might have fired. So maybe they kept count, maybe they didn't. If they're looking at, hey, I unloaded my gun, or I only shot once, or I shot 3 times, well, what happens later if we find out they shot 5 times? Well, the officer only said they shot 3 times. Well, that's that first. So we asked them mainly because we were looking for the evidence. So that question that we're asking them is, we kind of want to know about how many shots they fired. So that's going to help us look for evidence. The other thing is the direction that they fired, because the direction that they fired says, well, if they missed their target, we need to go look to see if anything else got hit behind it. So where were you standing? Where was the suspect? Which direction did you fire? Were there any other suspects? Did anybody else run off? And then are they injured? So that's what happens immediately on the scene from the internal affairs perspective is we ask just those really, really basic questions. And so with the body camera, body worn cameras, again, what you're looking at is the body worn camera is a camera. So it's going to catch that light back there. It's going to catch that Coke bottle. It's going to catch everything. But while I'm talking right here, did I see that light? No. Has anybody that's been watching this seen that light back there? It's off right now, but have you even paid attention to that in the background? Have you paid attention to the fact that that's an old style Coke bottle right there? It doesn't matter because you're listening to me talk and that's there. So yes, it shows everything, but it only shows it from one angle. Unless you have a couple of body cameras and you've got more than one officer, then you might get it from a couple of angles. But just because this angle shows one thing and this angle shows something else, doesn't mean the two officers saw it that way. So the body cameras are really good at showing those particulars and helping us break down the timing of the incident. How long did it start happening? What did the officer say? So you're actually getting the real words. Now, when police officers release body camera, it all depends on what it is that we're releasing it for. If a news media comes to us and says they want this body camera, and a district attorney, the courts have said, you have to release this body camera, we just release the body camera. We do what we call redactions. Redactions are going to be of juveniles' faces. Redactions are going to be of innocent parties. Redactions, and so their faces will be blurred. There will be redactions like on a computer screen because names, dates of birth, social security numbers, we have that information on a, give me just 1 second. Sorry about that. My dog does not like my next door neighbor behind us, so she likes to bark at her. So with those redactions, that pops up on our computer screens. A lot of times we might hold up someone's driver's license. Well, we redact that. So people hear redactions and they hear editing. They hear we're trying to cut things. We're trying to change things. We're trying to hide things. And that's not what a redaction is. A redaction is basically taking out things that we become legally liable for if it gets disseminated to the public. Now, editing occurs for courtroom by most often a defense because they want to show certain snippets. Now, a lot of times prosecutors, they're going to show the whole video. They're going to say, okay, I'm going to start it at this point and I'm going to show it to here. And they're just going to let it play. Well, a defense attorney is going to go up there and they're going to cut out this 10 seconds and then they're going to cut out this 20 seconds. And they're going to say, I want to draw your attention to this specific time. Now, from a news media perspective, does the news media want to take an event that had 15 minutes of pre-time and then a 2-second critical incident where the shooting occurs and then the aftermath that might take another 15, 20 minutes before we get everything calmed down and the body worn cameras turned off and everything? They don't want to show all of that. They want to show that little clip as to what happened. And then they're going to show that clip. And so it's missing all of its context. And so that's why you hear a lot of times police, public information officers, they really try to explain there's a lot more to this. And even when they do release stuff, you always hear law enforcement saying, we're not saying this is the whole story, but we feel like we need to show you this. We need to show you what we're looking for, and that, slow down before you try to, just go after the officer. Is it legal for an attorney to edit footage? Now, if they change the information inside of it, yes, because then they're falsifying evidence. But if they just kind of clip out and only show you certain things, that's not the same thing. Editing a video, my husband does computer forensics. And one of the things that they have to do is they have to authenticate video. And that's the question right here. Who determines if they've changed the event? That's when you hire forensic analysts for computer video specialists, because there's actually, anytime you change something in a video, it leaves behind what they call a footprint. It leaves behind some type of digital evidence that shows this is not the original video. And as soon as it's not, and as soon as it's not the original video, you start to say, why not? Now, there are differences when we talk about enhancing video. Like, you've seen some videos where the color is just really, really bad, and it's hard to see the differences. You know, with Zoom, everybody sees this. It doesn't matter how good your camera is or whatever, but the lighting in this room, as I've been talking, goes up and down. And sometimes it just gets real shadowy and then it comes back. There are ways to adjust that to make it easier to see so that it's all clean. Now, that's what they call enhancing. That's not editing. Editing would be stopping the video right here when I say, this is a good thing. And then later on, I talk about something else and I say, this is not a good thing. If you were to take those two things and put them together, or I say, this is a good thing, and then I say that over there is not a good thing. If you were to take where I said not a good thing and overwrite that with where I said good thing, like I said, those people that do forensic analysis on videos, they go into those frame by frame situations, and you'll be able to see where it gets spliced. So there are people that are trained in doing that specific thing. So for the most part, that's not going to happen. Cops are not going to put their careers on the line to change things. As soon as that comes in, that's in there. Let's see, keep the original. And that's kind of what I said. Sometimes they're only going to show little parts of it. There are some videos out there where you can absolutely tell, you know, they put captions on it, or they add music, or they do this. News media, for the most part, they're going to clip out what they want to show you. They're not going to alter anything inside of that clip most often, because if they get found out doing that, that could get them in trouble, because they do still have the journalistic integrity. And that's where you start hearing about some of the things that have come up with the deep fake videos, where it shows and some news medias have actually put those out, political speeches, where people have taken political speeches and cut and pasted them together so it sounds like they said something, and then the news media comes to hold of it on YouTube or whatever, and then they put it out there. Later on, that news media has to come out and say, we're sorry, you know, we put out something that actually wasn't correct, or they put out a photoshopped photo or something along those lines, because they're all out there and people get a hold of them. Eyewitness testimony. As a matter of fact, yes. There has been a lot of studies on memory, and one of the major individuals that studied it is a psychologist named Elizabeth Loftus, and she looked at eyewitness testimony. And you can have 10 people watch the same event and give you 10 different descriptions. And these are kind of a lot of the things that go into the differences, because just like I said, the victims, that go through those stress situations. Well, imagine being in a bank with 9 other people. Somebody comes in and robs that bank. You just had a pretty stressful experience. Even if that man never pointed the gun at you, he just robbed the bank right there in front of you. That is stressful. Your body, your brain is going to go through everything that I mentioned that a police officer's brain and body is going to go through. There are other things that are going to happen, such as time distortions. You might think that it took 10 minutes for that robbery to happen, and he was in and out in less than a minute. But for you, time changed. You might say, oh man, you know, that was over in a blink of an eye. And they're like, no, that was a 20-minute event. And you're like, no way, I was not sitting there for 20 minutes. And then sounds get distorted. Some people get involved in a shooting, or they hear a shooting and they're like, it sounded just like little pops, like somebody snapping a finger. It didn't make these big sounds that everybody's used to when you go to a shooting range and shoot a gun. So that gets distorted. Colors, shapes, all those things, your brain gets messed with. Some people be like, he was wearing blue shoes. Well, maybe he was wearing blue jeans and white shoes. But some people switch those in their brains and they're like, oh no, the pants were, no, he had on blue shoes. I know he had on blue shoes. But what they're doing is they're transferring the thought of the blue jeans to the shoes. And are they lying? No, they're not lying. But yes, absolutely. And that's a lot of things when you start talking about juries and how they're presenting stuff. And when people do that, that's why you tend to bring as many people in there and so that you can try to get the best overall picture of what happened, you know, the best thing that you can. And then from there, that's where your physical evidence. And so that's when you start talking about crime scene stuff. So if I'm able to take a pair of shoes and say, okay, well, these are white, they're the exact same size as the shoe print that was left here, and these were found on the suspect, but you were saying his shoes were blue. Does that mean I can't say this is my suspect? No, but I'm also not going to say you were lying. I'm also not going to say you were trying to hide this guy or anything. It's just the way memory goes. And so sometimes when you have a lot of conflicting testimony, that's when you have to bring in those expert witnesses. So you bring in a psychologist, you bring in somebody who has done memory, and you say, okay, what can we expect from this? You know, the human memory is not a VCR, but some people feel like it is. They feel like that's how your brain works, that you hit record, just like you guys are recording this session, and that's going to be how your brain remembers it. Your brain has never remembered in that fashion. If you think about even your most clear memories, they don't remember like a VCR. They remember your perspective. And that's what we really try to get to. And that's why you go back and you do repeated interviews with some people sometimes, because there's a lot more to it. So I think I'm kind of getting to where I'm wrapping up. So definitely I want to keep the questions coming, because I think I've presented as on the actual substance of what I've got. So definitely any additional questions, please throw them at me.
Anybody else have questions? We've been using the Q&A box, but does somebody want to ask a question?
I put one in the chat, and I don't know if you addressed it or not, but I'll just read what I put. With so many of these shootings, when you watch the full tape, not just what is on the news, it's clear the suspect was resisting arrest. Why doesn't the news media watch the full tape and, now I lost it, learn something about police procedure? Once a suspect resists arrest, what are the officer's options and protocol? Oh, we can't hear you.
It keeps muting. All right, there we go. It kept muting my. All right. So with the resisting, and that's part of the narrative that's gone in right now, is you're hearing that a lot of times with some of the stuff. He was running away. He was running away. What danger did he pose? He was running away. And when that's when we hear those things, for me as a police officer, it's almost like they say, well, if they're trying to get away, we should just let them.
Oh, no, that's
And
not what.
we as police, no, I'm just saying that's kind of how that narrative goes, because society doesn't want us to let the person go. Society wants us to catch the person if they've done something wrong and if they've resisted arrest. But so you kind of hear that narrative going on right now. So the news media, a lot of times they are selling their stories. They're selling those narratives. They're doing what they can to humanize a piece, or to give a piece a different perspective. And so with a police department, what do we do to overcome somebody resisting? And that's when you look at a lot of the police reform bills. When I first started this career many, many years ago, and even prior to when I started, you didn't backtalk an officer. If an officer told you to do something, you did it. And then we've kind of started to evolve a little bit. If I tell you you're under arrest, I'm taking away your freedom. Should I expect you to be happy about that? No, I should expect you to not want to be under arrest. So if you're verbally telling me, no, I don't want to be under arrest, and you're kind of doing this, are you really resisting me? But now when I go to grab a hold of you and I say, okay, now I'm putting somebody in cuffs. Now this person is starting to punch me, do those types of things. That's when we start talking about the difference between police violence and police brutality. Everybody hears the word violence and they're like, oh, well, that's just a horrible thing. They teach me how to punch. They teach me how to hit somebody. You look at two boxers, they come out of the ring bloody. So what you're seeing a lot of times, if you're seeing a police officer punching somebody, they're like, oh my God, that's brutal. That's over the top. It's like, but sometimes punching somebody or delivering what we call targeted strikes, because that's normally what we're doing. Yes, we're punching, but we're punching to specific parts of the body. And we're doing that because we're trying to get the body to move in ways so that we can get them in cuffs. That's why we call it arrest control. It's not just punching to punch, because if I'm just punching to punch, well, I'm not getting anywhere, because then I basically have to overpower them and over muscle them and get them to give up. What I'm doing is I'm striking them in certain ways to get a hold of their body and to get their arms behind their back and get them cuffed. And that's where you start looking at, is it a justified response? If the person is just punching me and I pull out my gun and shoot them, probably not going to be a justifiable situation. But if somebody's punching at me and I pull out my taser and I use my taser, that can be seen as something, yes, absolutely justified, because I was arresting them for a lawful reason. And that's the other thing that you see, is that, the person was being arrested on a warrant. So the person, society has said when they have a warrant on them, they need to go to jail. And we as cops show up and we say, okay, society says you need to go to jail. You need to go to jail. Well, you start resisting us, then we use force against you. The narrative that comes out, well, they were there to serve a warrant. It's like, well, then that means the man was supposed to be under arrest, or the woman was supposed to be under arrest. And that's where you're starting to see a lot of the narrative come out. And it's really more of from the civil attorneys that you're seeing a lot of this, because that's what they need to do. They need to have those narratives. All right. Yeah. So not just shooting, but any use of force, whether the shooting was justified or not. Let's see. What do I think of administering tranquilizer to resisting folks? Okay. That is a wonderful topic, because I don't make that decision. as a police officer, that is not my responsibility. I am not a medical professional, but have I seen resisting people when we administer those drugs calm down? Absolutely. I had a gentleman that, this guy was very, very large, and I responded to a noise complaint. And the noise that he was making was he was having a psychotic break. So I get more officers there. We're standing there. We're still talking to him, but I'm doing everything that I can to be as non-threatening as possible to him, because I recognize this person is having, but we've got to get him to help. We can't just leave him in his apartment having this psychotic break. Well, our choices are to physically try to go in there, grab hold of him, and fight with him to get him under control, or get our paramedics involved. The paramedics call the doctors. They talk to the doctors and they say, this is what we have going on. They get permission from the doctors to administer the drugs. They administer the drugs. The only thing that we do as law enforcement at that point is, in this particular situation that I'm talking about, is we grabbed hold of his arms and just kind of held his arms together so that they could do the injection. They did the injection and we just held. And then he calmed down within 15 seconds. It's amazing how some of these drugs work and how fast they work. We had another guy who was having a psychotic incident in our booking facility. And he's mentally, he thinks the walls are talking to him. He's thinking all this stuff's going on. He's writhing around on the floor. We're trying to keep him from hitting his head on the wall, but we need to get him onto a gurney and get him to a medical facility. So the EMTs showed up. They administer the ketamine. So there are times when I see it as very, very beneficial, but it's one of those things that it has to be done with everybody on board, and it has to be done with a lot of thought, because the basic thing is when ketamine is used and those types of things are being used, it is most often because the person is experiencing a medical event and we need to get them to the doctor, but we can't get the doctor to them in the field. So how do we get them to the doctor? So anytime we're starting to talk about sedatives, it's the sedatives are to get them to the hospital. All right.
So I think someone asked, so bottom line, was the shooting justified? And why or why not?
And I don't know if that was on a specific case or if that was just a generalized
I think
talking.
the case that you were demonstrating.
Oh, the case I talked about, absolutely. It was a justifiable shooting. Even though all the shots went into the back, we were able to prove that he had opened up the door, because that bullet went out somewhere. Since it was not inside of the car, we were able to prove that he had opened up the door, which meant he was coming out of the car, which is why the shots went through the car into his back. So that way I was able to actually prove that he was turning, and as he was turning in his seat, that's how those shots came in the back. And the only way for him to be turning with that door open shows that he was on the way coming out of the vehicle. So it definitely was a justifiable and legally sound case. But even then, the estate, it's still, a human being. So regardless of whether he was trying to do harm to one of my fellow officers or not, he's a human being. His estate has rights. So, I'm still going to respect that. And so what force or forces behind delegitimizing police policy? The biggest thing that I see is we've got to continue to educate. We've got to continue to reach out, throw back the veil on what we're doing, because for so long, police, we tried to keep a lot of our tactics quiet because we didn't want the bad guys to hear about them. But the thing is like the bad guys, they know how to get this information. They're getting it. if they're trying to do something bad and they want to ambush, they're going to research police tactics. They're going to research these things to know what we're doing. So we're not really hiding anything except hiding it from the people who really need to know why we do the things that we do. So I am currently a PhD student with UC Denver. So I am working towards my doctorate to do research in this area. And that's one of the big things that I'm doing as a police officer, just not only through my organization, is I am studying not just criminal justice, I'm studying political policy, I'm studying public affairs, because showing the police perspective as a practitioner and then bringing that to the table and saying, okay, this is how we can work together to kind of get these policies so that they can start matching up. And it's a two-way street. And I will go back to Sir Robert Peel. You know, he made a mention, he gave his principles of law enforcement. And one of the biggest ones that they talked about is they talked about the fact that it's law enforcement's responsibility to do the education. It's law enforcement's responsibility to do the outreach, because we're the ones you pay. You pay us to do our job. So as our job, we're the ones that should be reaching out. It shouldn't be society reaching out. Now, does that mean we're always going to be met with an open hand and open hearts that are willing to come to the table and talk to us? No, but it means we have to continue to fight that fight. We have to continually reach out and do those outreaches. And so that's part of me being a guest at this group and being able to share this stuff with you. That's some of the stuff that I love to do. And I just, any opportunity I get to share my profession with people, you know, I'm all for it. Whether you like my profession or you don't like my profession, I'm going to give you the same thing. All right.
Well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Donnell. Absolutely. Law enforcement, education, and just making this world a better place is definitely one of my passions.
Well, I think we're over time. I know it's almost 8:20.
Oop, I'm sorry.
No, we've kept you. This group, we can ask questions all night.
But yeah, and if there's specific topics and things, like I said, I am a researcher. During school time, my time is a little bit more demanded with school and work, but definitely during summer breaks, winter breaks, those types of things. If there's things that anybody wants to reach out to me for specific cases or specific things or something that you might want me to research, you know, I'm always available to help.
Are you on summer break? This is my own personal question.
Yes, I am on summer break right now. I have one paper that I've got to finish up, but that's all I've got going. I'm on summer break until the end of August, and then I start some more classes.
Okay, I'm probably going to contact you. Because a lot of what you've been talking about is going to play into my next FBI novel.
Very good.
So
outstanding.
Yeah, would love to pick your brain.
Question here.
Absolutely.
Question. What do you think of citizen police academies?
I love them. As a matter of fact, I ran one, which is how I got introduced to this group. And is two of your members came and attended one of my citizen academies. Now, I don't teach the whole thing. What I do is I just kind of facilitated it and brought in a lot of specialized people to talk about their particular areas. And I think it is probably one of the most beneficial things for a community. As a matter of fact, we're trying to get our entire city council to come to our Citizen Police Academy, just so that they can truly see what it is we do, why we do it, and how we do it.
We tried very hard with our police department. We tried to get the members of our city council to go through our Citizen Police Academy, and they did not do it. Nobody ever did it.
Mm-hmm.
13 years and I couldn't
and-
get them to do it.
Right. And that's why we keep offering it, is because when they want to criticize us, that's the first thing that we say. You want to criticize us, here's all the invitations to come see us. And then we show that, and then we invite news media. We've had news media come to the Citizen Academy class. So, we can't make them show up, but we definitely put that invitation out there.
Yeah, I could say after going through it, just one trip through the shooting simulation, I shot the guy behind the apartment door, and I was shot. I shot a neighbor who was looking out the door, and I also shot into an open park where kids were.
Yeah.
So there you go. Don't give me a gun. I mean, it really is that split-second decision. And I thought, how are you supposed to assess all of this in that split second?
When
So
I
it's-
did the simulation, I only shot 3 times and my bullet actually brought the guy down. But my partner emptied his gun and hit absolutely nothing. I mean, he just panicked. And it was kind of scary when you think about it, because when they asked him how many shots do you think you made, he thought he only shot 4 or 5, but he emptied, I think, 12 or 15.
Yep.
And it was
Yep. It's eye-opening. Well, thank you so much, Amy. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. Great session.
Thank you, Amy.
I even
All
loved
right.
your drawings. I mean, spontaneous. You just winged it just like that.
Well, I've done a lot of presentations on this particular one. And so therefore, I think once I get a chance to show it to the attorneys, as far as what I'm doing, that I don't think that they're going to have a problem with it, because like I said, nothing in my presentation am I disparaging the deceased.
Right.
And because, he had a family, he had, everything, it's just, this is a very, very sobering, dispassionate look at it on X, Y, and Z happened. This is how we were able to show it. But yet, I'm not, calling this guy a horrible name or even looking at it that way. This is just something that happened that kind of shows, why we need to do the things that we do.
Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you for the invitation. And like I said,
Thank you.
I am
Nice
always
to see
here for you.
everybody.
Jamie, thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye.
Okay,